Anna Freud thought very highly of him, and she trusted him with the letters of Sigmund Freud. And before, this was not open to the public, and no one knew about these letters. But Jeffrey Masson spent years going over the letters, and what he discovered shocked him. The early Freud and the later Freud are two different people. They have two different theories about trauma and abuse. Okay? And in his book, he presents the evidence, which are Freud's letters to friends. All right, so let's just read a couple. This is early Freud. I therefore put forward the thesis that at the bottom of every case of hysteria, there are one or more occurrences of premature experience, occurrences which belong to the earliest years of childhood. Okay? There are a whole number of other things that vouch for the reality of infantile sexual scenes. In the first place, there's the uniformity which they exhibit in certain details. So what he's saying is, I know that people don't believe me, but the evidence is clear. I've talked to different people. They don't know each other. And they're telling the same story. They're providing the same details. So either there's this giant conspiracy, or they're telling the truth. It is less easy to refute the idea that the doctor forces reminiscences of this sort on the patient, that he influences him by suggesting to imagine and reproduce them. Nevertheless, it appears to me equally untenable. I've never yet succeeded in forcing on a patient a scene I was expecting to find in such a way that he seemed to be living through it with all the appropriate feelings. Perhaps others may be more successful in this. When you read Freud, you see him as a very clear, as a very nuanced, as a very balanced thinker. Okay? He accepts there are different possibilities. It's possible that he himself is suggesting false memories to his patients. And he says, this is possible, but I have failed to achieve this goal. And there are others who may be better at this than I, but I haven't been able to do it. Okay? So based on this evidence, he argues that these patients must be telling the truth. Okay? This is the early Freud. This is Sandor Ferenczi, and for the longest time, they were colleagues. They were best friends. They were both advocates for patients. And then they had a falling out. Okay? They started to, they basically refused to talk to each other anymore. Okay? And the reason why is Sandor Ferenczi continued to advocate for patient rights, whereas Sigmund Freud completely changed his attitude. All right, so let's look at the new Freud. Since child masturbation is such a general occurrence and is at the same time so poorly remembered, it must have an equivalent in psychic life. And in fact, it is found in the fantasy encountered in most female patients. Namely that the father seduced her in childhood. This is a later reworking which is designed to cover up the recollection of infantile sexual activity and represents an excuse and extenuation thereof. The grain of truth contained in this fantasy lies in the fact that the father, by way of his innocent caresses in earliest childhood, has actually awakened the little girl's sexuality. It is these same affectionate fathers that are the ones who then endeavor to break the child of the habit of masturbation. Okay, so what Freud is trying to say is, young girls from a very early age, they are sexual animals. They have these urges, and they have this longing for the father. And it's compounded by the fact that the father, in his innocence, hugs and caresses his little girl. It's made worse when the father notices that the girl is masturbating and tries to stop her. And this creates a sense of both resentment, hatred, and more longing. Okay? So now what Freud is saying is, it's not the father. The father did nothing. He's innocent. The girl is the one who because of these sexual urges, has all these sexual fantasies that she is no longer able to differentiate between fantasy and reality. All right? So this is from the essay, Fragments of Analysis of Hysteria. The love-hungry little girl, unhappy at having to share her parents' affection with her brothers and sisters, realizes that all that tenderness comes flowing back when her parents are made anxious by her illness. The girl now knows a way of calling forth her parents' love. So now he's explaining why hysteria is so common in society. And the answer is very simple. Women are desperate for attention. It's that simple. They're fine, they have no issues, they just want attention. And that's why they are hysterical, okay? Because they know that illness attracts attention from caregiving males. This is Sigmund Freud's book, Civilization and Its Discontents. And in it, he expresses his contempt for women in society. All right, let's read it. Furthermore, women should soon come into opposition to civilization and display their retarding and restraining influence. Those very women who, in the beginning, laid the foundations of civilization by the claims of their love. Women represent the interests of the family and of sexual life. The work of civilization has become increasingly the business of men. It confronts them with ever more difficult tasks and compels them to carry out instinctual sublimations of which women are little capable. All right, so Freud's saying this. We must thank women because, well, women, there be no civilization. They give birth. They raise families. But men are smarter than women. And so men are tasked with the responsibility of building civilization, of creating science, of creating literature, of creating philosophy, of politics, of administration. Okay? But what all women want is attention, to be doted on. And that's why women hate civilization. First of all, because they're not smart and they can't really contribute to civilization, but also because it takes men away from them. Okay? So now the question then is, okay, this is like really strange because the Freud that we encountered earlier was a scientist. Very clear, very nuanced, very subtle in his thinking. This Freud, he's like a myth maker. He's almost like a priest. Okay, so what explains this transition? Okay, well, there's a very simple explanation, right? The simple explanation, which is simple explanation, is he may be treating his patients who are young women, but who's paying the bills? The father, right? It's the father who's paying Freud. So if Freud went to the father and said, oh, I talked to your daughter, it's your fault that she's like this. Well, they wouldn't be very happy, okay? So we can understand why, at the end of the day, Freud decided that he needed to change his story if he wanted to maintain his clientele. So the question then is, okay, is there evidence to suggest that sexual trauma and abuse was common in Vienna at this time in history, the late 19th century? And the answer is yes. There is some piece of evidence, okay? Not complete, okay? But there's some piece of evidence to suggest this was actually a thing in Vienna in the late 19th century. So Vienna is part of the Austria-Hungary Empire, and there are lots of secret societies and religious cults at this time, okay? One of them is called Frankinism. And Frankinism rejected Jewish norms and believed they were obligated to transgress moral boundaries. Okay, remember, the question of faith, right? How do you demonstrate your faith in God? How do you know God loves you? How do you know you're faithful? Well, you break taboos. And they were breaking a lot of taboos. The Frankists engaged in sexually promiscuous rites, such as the infamous 1756 incident where they were allegedly caught dancing around a half-naked woman. At its height, Frankinism claimed perhaps 50,000 followers. That's a lot. 50,000 followers is a lot. And a lot of them were powerful people. Primarily Jews living in the Polish Lutheran Commonwealth, as well as Central and Eastern Europe. Later, Frankists were encouraged to convert in mass to Catholicism, okay? And so who are these people? Well, they are followers of a man named Sibatai Zevi, who lived in 19th century, who was a Jewish rabbi who lived in the 19th century Ottoman Empire. And for many, he was extremely charismatic, and he was basically their Messiah. Okay? He was the Jewish Messiah. And he preached a religion of transgression because transgression meant courage. It meant empowerment. it meant true faith. And he had a lot of followers. And that's why the Sultan called him and then said, okay, I'll give you a choice. You can either continue doing what you do and I'll kill you, or you convert to Islam. So he converted to Islam. But when he did so, he told his followers, I did so because God doesn't care about what you do. God cares about what's in your heart. As long as you're true to God, what you do in life does not matter. Okay? And the religion he started is still around today. Okay? And this is from Wikipedia, okay? All this is from Wikipedia, and you can look at it online to make sure that I'm just making this up, all right? So as part of this movement, I mean, you can read this, right? All right. Sexual abuse was actually pretty common. So we have evidence to suggest that, yes, these women were probably telling the truth, and Freud knew so. But Freud ultimately had to change his story in order to protect his livelihood. Okay, but there's also another reason why Freud had to change his story. Okay, and it has to do with a man named Ignaz Semmelweis. Ignaz Semmelweis lived in 1840s Vienna. And he was a doctor who worked at Vienna General Hospital. And he was in charge of 2 maternity clinics, places where women gave birth. Same hospital, same staff, but the mortality rate at the second clinic was much higher than the first clinic. Women could die giving birth because of fever. So 10% of women were dying in the second clinic, and only about 3% were dying in the first clinic. So in this Semmelweis, he was appalled by this. And so he launched an investigation as to what was happening. And he spent 7 months, a long, long time, trying to figure out what was happening. And he looked at all different possibilities, including weather, including treatment, including personnel, everything, okay? And then he had a radical breakthrough. He had an insight, which is this. In the second clinic, it was a teaching hospital. So doctors would in the morning work with cadavers, okay? They would show students how to dissect cadavers. And then in the afternoon, they'd go and deliver babies. And Semmelweis, he didn't know why, because at this time, germs were not a thing. People didn't know about the existence of germs. He didn't know why, but he theorized that there could be a connection. So he created a protocol. He basically had everyone wash their hands using a formula of water, chlorine, and lime. And we still use it today, exactly the same formula today. And so he tried this protocol. And it was a miracle, because after people started to wash their hands, no one died in childbirth anymore. And Semmelweis, being a rigorous scientist, he collected all this data, conducted a lot of experiments to prove this had to be true, that washing your hands could save lives. And then he presented his findings to the staff, the doctors of Vienna General Hospital, believing that they would praise him and then promote this all throughout Europe in order to save as many lives as possible. Instead, the doctors told him they had to keep this quiet. They'll promote Semmelweis, they respect him, and he did amazing work. But if word came out that this was true, then people would know that they were responsible for the deaths of these women before, and their reputation would be in tatters. And then Semmelweis, of course, responded by, yes, I understand that, but if we don't publish our findings, if we don't let the world know about this, more women are going to die in childbirth. And they fought for a long time, years and years. And then eventually, Semmelweis, he was blacklisted. He was not allowed to work ever in a hospital again. And then ultimately, he was confined to an insane asylum where he was killed by the guards. And he died, leaving a young family. And so that's what happens to you when you defy powerful people in Vienna in the 19th century. And Freud didn't want the same fate. Okay? And he also had a young family. So this story is horrible, but if you don't believe me, you can go on Wikipedia, okay? He was institutionalized in an insane asylum by his colleagues, and in the asylum, he was beaten by the guards. He died 14 days later. All right, so this is the fate that will happen to you in Vienna if you defy powerful people. So now we have an explanation for why Freud made the transition, why he changed his story. But now there's another problem, which is, how does Freud convince his patients to go along, right? Before, he told his patients, I believe you, and they trusted him, and now he's changing his story. So how can he convince them that they, in fact, do suffer from sexual fantasies? And like this experience of sexual abuse, it's all just made up in the head. And that's a very hard job to do. So the solution is the interpretation of dreams. All right? So Freud pioneered a new way of hypnotizing his patients. So together they would analyze their dreams, right? Because if you talk about their memories in their past, they're going to fight back and says, I remember very clearly. If you talk about their dreams, that allows you to suggest subtly new ideas and new memories, to basically implant new memories and basically gaslight that person. Okay? Does that make sense? All right, so the interpretation of dreams.